Police of Reddit, what is the absolute worst crime scene you've come across? My dad is currently sitting right by me. He has 20 years active patrol duty and then 7 as sheriff. Well, one time we got a call from guy saying his girlfriend broke his D. Obviously, we were skeptical, so we go along with ambulance and fire to their house and walk into his girlfriend sobbing and shaking in the corner. We walk into the bedroom and let me tell you, D's might not be able to break, but this was a very broken D. Turns out they had gotten drunk and she wanted to hop on his D by jumping from the top of their headboard onto him. Yeah, didn't work. She bent his D in half. By the time we got there it had turned black and people and the bottom part was swelled but the top part was just flopping. I felt bad for that guy. The other one was a call we got from this woman saying Mrs. Ziz is 90 years old and we haven't seen her in 7 weeks. Can you perform a wellness check? This was in the middle of August after a couple streaks of 100-degree weather. 7 weeks is a long time. So me and Rich, his partner, go over and lo and behold no visible AC unit in this 100-year-old house. So we load up our noses with Vicks and open the door. Yeah, the Vicks didn't help. That house was well over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This lady had basically melted into a sludgy mess with some human feature still visible on her couch. The vapor her body was giving off was on the windows like condensation. Rich and I both threw up and called the coroner, who basically had to remove this lady with her couch cushions. It was bad. My 3rd year on the job, working a housing patrol, went to a domestic. Female caller on the line screaming. Getting constant updates as my partner and I run up 14 flights of stairs. We finally reach the door. I'm ducking gassed. My partner was a little Puerto Rican dude. Great cop. Weighed all of like a $120. He tries to boot the door and bounces off it like Wile E. Coyote. We could hear the screaming all the way down the hall as soon as we made it out of the stairwell. I give the door the boot. It's a steel security door with 3 dead bolts. Inside the apartment, it sounds like theirs is a legit WWE ladder match going on. With this howling, high-pitched keen and low shouting, I kicked the door at least a dozen times. I'm about to puke. My partner is screaming at me, boot the ducking door. Man, we gotta get in there. The shouting goes up in volume and the scream goes to a shriek. Constant and wavering. Then there's no shriek, just the shouting. I finally get the door busted open. There's a woman on the floor in the middle of the entryway. It looks like she fought a bear and lost. It's the first time I've seen that much blood on the ground. The floor is a slip and slide of blood. The woman is alert, mostly rocking herself back and forth. She reaches up to me as I make entry. My boy, my baby boy. She just repeats it over and over. The male half rounds the corner and comes bullying at me. The fight is on. He has a meat fork in his hand. I don't even have time to draw before we make contact. He's shirtless and covered in sweat. His arms are bloody all the way up to his shoulders. He stinks of booze, not the fresh drunk stink but the acrid, hard stench of a habitual alcoholic. He also smells of old weed and piss. My partner is literally bouncing off the walls behind me, trying to get into the fight. I finally slam the dude on the ground. He's not huge. He's not even big. But he's got murder strength. I'm not a small dude. I can barely hang on to him. Imagine yourself fighting a shaved honeybadger covered in blood and piss and sweat, in a 3-foot wide hallway, on a floor covered in 6 lube. My partner finally gets into the fight, gets jabbed several times with the meat fork. My partner's nickname was Dr. Pepper. He starts yelling spray spray spray, while I am trying to clobber the it out of the dude with my MacLeod. My partner dumps a Hulkin on this dude, and also on me. I've been sprayed so many times by him that I am mostly used to it. I don't remember a whole lot after that, except hearing my gun. I do remember seeing the dude's right arm coming out and I see the pistol. There are a lot of gunshots. I don't know how many were mine. Epilogue. The female victim had 47 stab wounds. She survived, although she incurred debilitating injuries. My partner was stabbed with the meat fork 3 times. Twice in the right thigh and once in the right forearm. He also suffered a gunshot wound to the throat. Recovered and retired last year after 20 years on the job. I took several stabs, the worst of which being my right hand and right shoulder. I still have permanent damage and loss of motor function. The suspect lived, although he is now confined to a wheelchair and uses a colostomy bag. The 4-year-old boy who was thrown out of the window while I was trying to kick the door down didn't survive. I'm still on the street. This incident was the first of the worst. I dream about them every night. Edited, I get caught up in reliving the event as the images translate themselves to words and my brain works faster than my fingers, resulting in errors that I, also being a writer of some poor renown, cannot allow to remain. Thus meat fork has been edited to meat fork, to wit, a large, two-pronged fork utilized to serve roasts and turkey, or to stab people with. Edit number 2. They have been a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks and they have all been right. I was still relatively new. Despite the fact of working in a large, busy agency, the standards of police training at the time could best be described as either laughable or what the actual duck. We should have gone in guns out, ready to do work. We didn't. I was immediately in a lethal force encounter with a clear risk of death or great bodily harm to myself or others. My brain hadn't made that gear change. I was still in a wrestling match. Shooting badge eyes at the time was very seriously discouraged. It wasn't until I saw the gun that I realized I was in a no I could die scenario. I was trapped in the mindset of trying to gain compliance against a smaller, albeit armed and determined opponent. It didn't occur to me that I or my partner could be killed. I wasn't physically aware of my injuries until the conclusion of the incident. Prior to that incident, I'd been involved in several encounters with subjects possessing either blunt or edged weapons and our standard response, despite all the hue and cry over the Tula rule, was rush in, dogpile, wallop the crap out of, cuff, stuff in the wagon and then go for waffles. A former colleague and very well regarded instructor puts it thus: learning occurs only after repeated, demoralizing failures. I know a guy who is a jail guard, and he also worked in TBS, Dutch equivalent of jail for people with severe mental health problems. There was this schizophrenic guy who was convinced he was a dog. Now that might just sound sad and pathetic, but the guy actually bit someone in the throat and shredded his jugular. He tried to do it in jail as well, and he now has to wear a muzzle 24/7. Danish cop here. Some years ago a coked up driver hit a woman in central Copenhagen. She was hit with about 120 km/h while crossing the street with her boyfriend in hand. Her body flew about 100 meters down the street. On second thought I have removed parts of the description out of courtesy. When the first patrol car arrived at the place of impact, the boyfriend was sitting beside the body and caressing her head. They had to be 3 officers to pull him away from the woman. The driver was a well-known man that had done something close to this before. 2 underage Danish girls was in the backseat of the car he hit her with. I ended up in a fight with one of them cause she wouldn't stop phoning different people while we still were chasing the driver in the area around the car. Oh, and he could have killed about 10 people. About 20 seconds before he hit her, he drove through a red light at the busiest pedestrian crossing in Denmark. It was about 0100 on a Saturday night and it was the night the Christmas beer was released. He got a sentence of 4 years and 6 months. The longest sentence in Danish history for a hit and run. Prisoners in Denmark only serve 3/4 of the sentence. And at the weekend he got to go home from prison. In the last year of the sentence, it's only a couple of months since the newspapers wrote that he hadn't returned to prison after a weekend at home. That's the lenient Danish prison system for you. A guy high on dust aka PCP went over to his adult sister's house right before they left for a family birthday party. As the family is packing the car up, the guy remains behind in his 7-year-old niece's bedroom still high on dust. His niece forgets something in her room and runs back upstairs into the apartment. As soon as she reaches the apartment she hears a gunshot. She walks into her room and sees her uncle proned out on the floor bleeding profusely from the back of his head. Brains all over her bedroom wall. Family calls 911. I show up, walk in and assume the guy is dead by lack of movement and loss of blood. Find the gun. Make it safe. And out of nowhere hear a huge deep breath and see the guy's chest moving. With half of his brain blown apart, the guy was still alive for at least 10 minutes but unresponsive. Medics transported to hospital where he died but donated his organs. In the end it's the little girl who will live with that picture of her uncle for the rest of her life. It would be nice if you could take every kid out of every bad situation so they have a fighting chance to live a normal life. Added story. Suicidal female walks to the top of a 9-story hospital parking garage. Does a backwards swan dive off the top trying to kill herself. Ends up landing on both of her feet which take all the impact. Every bone from her feet up to her first rib is shattered but somehow she was still alive as I got there first. Looked like a slinky as EMS picked her up from the ground to transport which in the end was futile. But for the few minutes I was on scene with her I was able to speak to the woman who was still conscious. The most peaceful and eerily quiet conversation I had with a person who knew they were dead. Little girl tells her school nurse it hurts to pee. This leads to her making statements indicating molestation so they send her to hospital and call me. SANE nurse confirms there is trauma to her V. Because she is a child I cannot ask her questions. We set up a forensic interview with people trained to deal with this so it is less stressful. But I can listen in while she is talking to doctors. I hear her say when I'm bad mommy and uncle bad touch, name changed for privacy, stick fingers inside me. So now I go find mom. Expecting to hear complete denial. Nope. She tells me as a form of punishment she inserts fingers into her 5-year-old's V. Her brother, who lives with her, does it also. I wish I was making this up. Before you ask. The case was sent to the county prosecutor. I haven't heard anything from it since which means she plead out. It was dropped. Or it's still awaiting trial. I've seen some pretty gruesome murders and accidents. Saw a woman stabbed over 50 times. A guy whose head was completely caved in by his steering wheel. Plenty of suicides via shotgun to the mouth. The one that stands out to me the most wasn't fatal. And it wasn't even that gruesome. Some guy got high on PCP and thought everyone was a demon. An older woman, early 60s, woman was driving by and he decided to fight her. Pulled her out of her car and pummeled her face. Knocked her teeth out. Bruised her face real good. Gave her brain damage. She was conscious throughout the entire ordeal and I was the first on scene. It shocked me because she was minding her own business when this arsehole decided to ruin her life. It was random and unprovoked. If I'm not mistaken she had to quit her job due to memory issues from the brain injury. On top of that we had to fight the guy for a good 3 minutes until we got him into custody. He was a big guy and got roughed up pretty good but he was feeling no pain at all. My taser had absolutely no effect. We only got him into cuffs when 6 officers held him down and pulled his arms into place. He then proceeded to spit blood on us. Not a policeman, but I know a former forensic scientist. She described a case one time where a father of 2 didn't receive custody of his kids after a divorce. He flipped out and kidnapped his kids. A homeless man handed in 2 plastic bags into a police station a few days later of body parts that had been cut up. She had to reassemble the kids' bodies so they could be identified. It wasn't all I ever saw, but certainly the worst. My career was effectively ended by a lady that got hit by a car. It basically ripped her whole face off, except her eyes. Basically from the nose down. You could see her vocal cords. She was convulsing on the ground, and a crowd of people were standing around her. I was first there, and she was still alive. There was absolutely nothing I could do for her at that point. It was obvious she was bleeding out. I got down on the pavement, cradled her in my arms and told her she would be okay. While I tried to stop some of the bleeding, I knew I was lying, but I wanted her to not feel alone and scared when she died. She passed in my arms. As the medics showed up, they worked on her for a bit, but they called it before the chopper landed. 2 weeks later I quit. I've had severe PTSD since then. I drink Alad to self-medicate. I go to therapy. I've lost almost all of my friends and several jobs. I take pills every day for depression. Sorry for the vivid description, but you asked. I can still smell it, see it, the works. Shameless plugs. Since this place is a ducking graveyard on the front page, here's an older one submitted last month. Courtesy of you Candler. More than an officer who volunteers at my work from time to time told me that his worst experience was during his first year on the job. Apparently there was a car accident where the driver was wedged halfway out of the overturned car. Unfortunately, since the car was on fire, they couldn't help the man out and had to stand there and watch him burn to death while he screamed for them to help him. And another Thanks you corpse husband pastor and you/17 herp derp. More than a call goes out for reported screaming at mid-January. Important later. My father and another office respond to find a known deranged individual. Very long rap sheet and has been in and out of psychiatric care for years. Sitting on the front porch holding a double-sided wood splitting axe. Steam is coming up off the grass and there are chunks lying all over the lawn. Upon interviewing the suspect, he admits that he and a friend were playing poker. The suspect was losing nearly every hand and came to the conclusion that his friend was a H8 Southern for ghost and was cheating him. The suspect grabbed the axe and chased his friend outside and hacked him into dozens of pieces, thus causing the warm blood to create steam on the grass. My dad tells the suspect that he needs to get in the police car because it's H8 proof. He said the suspect dropped the axe and sprinted to get in the back seat while thanking them for helping him. TL. Doctor, my father convinced an axe murder to get in his cop car because it's ghost proof. Not a cop, but I did body removals for the private ambulance company I worked at. We got a call at 4 AM and our dispatcher asked us if we had 2 body bags. We did. We got there and the gist of it was that it was a double abuse homicide of 2 elderly women in their 70s. One was found with her pants around her ankles in one room, and the other was found in the bedroom down the hall with her hands pinned above her head underneath the bed frame. I have no idea if they ever caught the guy. I just pick up the bodies and take them to the morgue. Pretty messed up though. An older co-worker told me this one. A man lived in an apartment with his 3 kids and wife. He goes to work and comes home at night. When one of his kids comes up to him and says, "I saw mommy kissing the neighbor's pee-pee," he slit each of his children's throats while they slept and cut his wife's head off, left it on the kitchen table and smoked a cigarette calmly after calling 911 on himself. Said seeing the kids in their beds covered with open throats covered in blood ducked him up for a long time. Not police, but my father was a detective in the middle of his career. He told me of a crime scene where someone had hacked up his wife's head with an axe. When they went in, the family's dog was licking up blood and brain matter. My brother's husband is a cop. He dealt with this crack addict who ended up cutting off his Doge's cock and microwaving it. Apparently it took 3 officers to hold him back from the microwave as he ferociously battled to get at it to munch. Not a cop, but I am in college to become one. One of my professors at the time worked homicide as a lieutenant at the precinct and brought in crime scene photos all the time to show us on the projector. One was of the 17-year-old kid who'd had his head caved in on the early 2000s. It was a pretty big case at the time in Philadelphia. He worked construction part-time and walked home every Friday with a couple $100 in cash for his pay. His best friends, 1 girl and 2 guys, all in the 16-18 range, wanted to make a quick buck. The girl lured him to this regular meetup spot for 6 out near some woods. When he started taking his clothes off, the 3 friends jumped him. The 18-year-old guy, if I remember right, had a hammer, and his brother had a cinder block. Kid didn't stand a chance. His parents had to identify him based on the clothes he was wearing because there was practically nothing left of his face or hands. Defensive wounds. The brother got tried as an adult and got 25 to life. The 18-year-old got life. The girl got 15 for ratting out the other 2. Edit. Yes. This is the case of Jason Sweeney. My father was a cop for 25 years. He's seen summits in his time. Here's what he thinks was his worst crime scene. A domestic murder where a husband attacked and killed his wife with hammer blows to the head. She was discovered by her children, ages 4 and 7, who told their neighbors, who called the police. He was found on an industrial estate nearby, in his car, having expired through breathing exhaust fumes. Worst accident scene. A 7.5-ton goods vehicle lost control on a motorway, crossed all 3 lanes, went through the central reservation, hitting several vehicles on the opposite carriageway. One of these vehicles was a Mercedes Sprinter van. The impact flattened the Mercedes from the driver's side across the vehicle's back. The passenger walked away with a minor head injury. The driver's body had been stretched to approximately 9 feet long due to the impact force. The occupants of the 7.5-tonner were both dead. The impact being on front driver's side corner diagonally across the cab. The driver was decapitated from his chin up. The passenger was decapitated from the middle of her nose up. Extracting the remains was an interesting experience. Edit. Spelling. Not me. By my police trade school teacher told me a story of such a ducked up crime scene he was a part of. There was this beautiful woman, could have been a model, and she was naked in the floor of her hotel room, her head not attached to her body and blood everywhere. The entire hotel was a crime scene, and my teacher kept seeing cops sneak in to see the hot dead chick, and my teacher, who had command, was furious. Kicked them all out and tried to do his job. Until his higher up, I think a lieutenant, came in by asking around. I heard the hot headless chick was here. Since he was a higher rank, the second he stepped in he took command of the scene, and my teacher never did find out what happened, except some cops care about seeing a hot corpse than doing their job. One time on the south side of Chicago, I was on patrol with my partner and we saw people crowding around at the corner and intersection. It was the beginning of spring, when there's huge spikes in gang activity because the weather is finally nice and you can finally go outside. Unfortunately, this means there are lots of other people also outside, and some of them aren't so neighborly. So we see this crowd of people and assume there was a gang related incident. I announced myself and some people scattered, but a bunch stayed and I had to work my way through. I still couldn't see what they were surrounding until I got to the most inner circle, where an old woman in a nightgown was sobbing over the body of the serious tag that OP should have put on this post. I have two, but both not crime scenes. First, decapitated body in a one vehicle RTC in Concert, Durham, England. Crashed into a stone wall and overturned, somehow decapitating the driver. Second was a sudden death. In a flat, the occupants in the downstairs flat complained of a leaking drain from upstairs. Turned out the person upstairs had died. Rolled out of bed. Was decomposing on the floor. The leak was the various body fluids from the deceased. My dad's in the police in Britain and works in child and vulnerable adults protection in an English constabulary. He's seen some pretty ducked up things, but the worst one by far was this ring of people who bullied, tormented, and physically assaulted, hosed water, vulnerable adults with mental capacities of children. I have no idea how he copes with it, but he seems to, and I love him so much for the amazing work he did and continues to do. Here's the article if you are so inclined. There was a post on here a while ago from a cop where some guy grabbed a baby, put it under his arm and ran at the wall using the baby's head as a battering ram. The baby somehow survived and the guy was arrested. Not completely what OP is looking for, but a horrible scene nonetheless. My grandfather's friend was a truck driver for many years, and on one night while he was driving, a car swerved across the median and hit his truck head on. Killed everyone inside the car. And to make it worse, they had just crossed into America legally, so this small sedan had about 6 more people than it should have held stuffed into hollowed out places. So when he hit the car, a red mist just exploded out. He had people stuck up under the hood of his truck and it was a huge mess. Ducked him up for a while. Probably ducked up any responding officers too. Not a cop, but in my medium-sized town in Eastern Europe, 2 teenagers of 14 and 16 years old raped a homeless woman, then beat her. All this happened during midnight near the town center. After they were done with her, she was left to die. Somebody found her body and she was taken to the hospital, but she died because of the wounds. Both teenagers got away with it. The judge didn't sentence them to prison. My dad was a cop and the worst case he ever had was while he was a detective. They caught a local teacher with something 8 full CDs of CP. The most awful thing about it that you have to go through it all to see if you can identify any adults in the pictures to try and get them busted. Ducking sick. Posting on the behalf of my friend sitting next to me. Worst crime scene I've been to was 6-month-old baby being thrown out a 6-story window because the mother believed she was possessed by the devil. I recently went on a ride along and got to hear a number of stories that happened here in Portland. The absolute worst story was regarding a woman who had died in her home. The police arrived, cleared the home, and found the woman laying in her living room. The neighbors hadn't seen her for a while, so they believed she had been there for a number of days. She also had a dog, and when the dog got hungry, it started to eat her face. Her cheeks were gone, skin around her neck and forehead. They started their regular procedures when Mike, the cop I rode along with, thought he heard something and examined her closer. She was breathing. It was faint, but she was absolutely breathing. A stroke, or some sort of brain aneurysm had paralyzed her and taken her speech. She had to lay there and literally have her face eaten off her by a dog she couldn't feed. She died later in the ICU. A friend of mine's dad is a cop. He told the story of one time he was called to investigate a fire that was lit in an alleyway. This was midday. He'd yet to eat lunch and had skipped breakfast, and upon arriving to the scene noticed a particularly appetizing aroma coming from the fire. His mouth was involuntarily watering. Turns out, the fire was an ignited carpet, rolled up, with a dead person inside of it. 4 uncles sexually abusing 2 minor females. None of the uncles knew the other 3 were doing it, of course. Now that the young girls are in their 30s and have denounced the actions of their uncles, they've been banished from the family for telling the family secret. Not in the police, but I just finished serving on a jury for a capital murder trial a couple of weeks ago. Basically, a guy beat his 2-year-old son to death, and during sentencing it came out that he molested his 4-year-old daughter as well. As part of the trial we had to view all the forensic photos of this poor kid. 84 bruises, 15 broken ribs, head contusions, brain hemorrhage, lacerated intestine, and the list went on and on. Most of the jurors were shaking with rage when we returned to the jury room that day. This one's a bit of a cliche, and not really a crime scene. Few months old DOA, elderly women with no family, just 2 dogs. Family out of state asked for us to check on her. Got into her apartment. She had been dead a few months. Other than the smell, the sight of her eaten off fingers by the starving dogs that were there. I'm not in law enforcement, but ended up working very closely with them on one case that presented to my ER. A newborn infant had been microwaved by her mother's boyfriend because she wouldn't stop crying after he sexually violated her when changing her diaper. The baby's uncle found the baby and got enough neighbors gathered to set the boyfriend on fire. Police came in first with the baby. They gave me a heads up that the boyfriend might follow, but they decided to wait